Welcome back to the Josh Kane Presidential Fireside Chat. We've made it to the final 4 episodes. Just to give you a behind the scenes how this show is operated. So I basically taped the first 37 episodes over 3 weeks in August. And we are now sitting on October 20th. So I haven't taped a new episode in 2 months. So I'm a little rusty. But I needed to finish the last 4 books. It was like 3,000 pages in the last 2 months. So hopefully there's still people out there watching. I appreciate you still watching. I realize that I've probably taken on too much. I did this show to distract me from the pandemic and keep me from going insane. This show has made me 10 times more insane. Every day I think of at least 3 dozen things I wish I had done differently. The show is better than I thought it would be, but not nearly as good as I wanted it to be. So at this point, we're just finishing the show. I hope you're still out there watching. Again, I appreciate it. It has been fun. But anyway, we're on to episode number 38. The late, great Leslie King Jr., a.k.a. Gerald Ford Jr. That's right. Young Leslie King, born in Omaha, Nebraska, and his mom fled her abusive husband, Leslie King Sr., when young Leslie was only 16 days old, and she winds up in Grand Rapids, Michigan, where she meets Gerald Ford Sr., who raises young Leslie as his own. Leslie grows up, goes to the University of Michigan. He actually plays football for the University of Michigan, and actually gets multiple offers to turn pro. Again, at the time, this is back in the days of leather helmets, so take that for what it's worth. But he was very good. He played center for the University of Michigan. He turned those offers down, and upon graduation, he actually legally changes his name to Gerald Ford Jr. So he's an adult at that point. He's like 22 years old, and he changes his name to Gerald Ford. So thought that was pretty interesting. He marries famously Betty Ford, well known for, she got breast cancer and talked about it publicly, which at the time was pretty, kind of a taboo subject. And she also had problems with substance abuse, which she also talked about, and, famously set up the Betty Ford clinics and what have you. So, she's of major consequence as well. His vice president is Nelson Rockefeller. So that's Gerald Ford. So he grows up, graduates University of Michigan. He wants to go to law school, can't get into University of Michigan for law school. So he actually gets a job coaching football at Yale University. So while he's out in Yale, he starts taking law classes. Graduates with a law degree in 1941. Spring, May of 1941, obviously Pearl Harbor happens in December. He joins the Navy. So he does serve in the military, in the Navy, in the South Pacific. 4 years in the military. And then when he comes back after the war, he sets up like a private practice, law practice, and he gets involved in local Republican politics. And in 1948, he runs for Congress in Grand Rapids, Michigan. So he's a young guy, and he actually wins 13 terms in Congress. So, he's an Eagle Scout. So he's like a straight arrow, super hard worker, awesome guy. I mean, you'd wish you knew everybody was like Gerald Ford. He's a really good guy, real likable, to the point where, so in 1972, he wins his re-election. It was his 13th election. And at that point, his lifelong goal was to be Speaker of the House in Congress. And, we talked about in the Nixon episode, Nixon wins re-election in 72 by 18 million votes. But he does not win back Congress. So Ford's dream of being a Speaker of the House is dashed. And he actually decides that was it. That was his last term. He spent 13 years in Congress, 13 terms. That was going to be his last. Obviously, his fortunes changed, at the fallout of that creep Spiro Agnew gets removed from office. And he's so well liked in Congress on both sides of the aisle that like he has no problem being confirmed. Like overwhelmingly, like maybe between the two houses of Congress, like a dozen people voted against him being vice president. So easily wins the vote of Congress to become the vice president under Nixon. And then again, famously, Nixon resigns. Ford is elevated to the presidency. And, you know, the ultimate irony, of course, is Ford's like such a good guy. He probably would have never been elected president on his own. He just didn't have that sort of that icy cold whatever that it takes to be the president. And he's the only person that served as vice president and president that was never elected to either job. So it's kind of interesting. He's such a good guy. It's hard to not like Gerald Ford, but he's put in an impossible situation. And he kind of stumbles right out of the blocks by almost immediately pardoning Nixon. I totally disagree with the pardon of Nixon. You know, spoiler alert, we went to the Gerald Ford Library in Grand Rapids, and everywhere you go, every room that you go into, it's one high-profile person after another from both sides of the aisle telling you that Ford did the right thing pardoning Nixon. And the more people said it, the more upset I became. I don't agree with it at all. The idea that the president is somehow above the law, I feel like that opened up a Pandora's box that we're still sort of dealing with today. People thinking the president is above the law. And I get it. He wanted to go on to manage the country, and it was being bogged down by, you know, Watergate and Nixon, what have you. But I feel like at some point we need to have an adult conversation with ourselves, and, you know, we can't move forward unless people are held accountable. So that's my feelings on it. So he pardons Nixon, and the American people speak. He does not win re-election. So I'm not alone in feeling that. The people spoke. So ultimately, I'm right, essentially. So he runs for his own term in 76 against Jimmy Carter. And it's kind of an interesting fact. So Ronald Reagan challenges him in the race for the Republican nomination, which actually really hurt Ford's chances of winning the nomination. So at one point, Ford almost chooses Ronald Reagan to be his running mate in 76. So that, you know, that probably would have prevented a Ronald Reagan presidency at that point. In 80, does he run as a sitting vice president? Who knows if they had won. The other interesting thing, when Reagan runs in 1980, they were going to put Ford as the vice president under Ronald Reagan in 1980. And the night before he was about to announce the decision, Ford goes on national TV with my buddy Walter Cronkite and basically says that it's going to be a co-presidency. And Reagan hit the roof over that and said, no way, it's not a co-presidency, and bounced Ford off the ticket. So that's interesting. Again, there's a lot to Gerald Ford. Really good guy. You really root for the guy. He's, you know, again, I think he makes a huge mistake with Nixon. But here's a great book, soup to nuts biography on Gerald Ford. Again, served in the military, 13 terms in Congress. You know, so well liked that everybody overwhelmingly puts him on the vice president ticket. So he's a good guy. Travel recommendations. So again, his presidential library is in Grand Rapids, Michigan. It's terrific. It's right on, I think it's the Grand Rapids River. It's right on the river. It's terrific. And two more travel recommendations, not necessarily tied to Ford specifically, more tied to Michigan. It's my show, so I can do whatever I want. So in Michigan, if you ever get a chance, and maybe you've never heard of it or you've heard of it, Mackinac Island is terrific. I can't say enough about it. It's right at the top of Michigan. You know, it's shaped like a mitt. It's like up here. It's where the Lake Michigan pours out into Lake Huron. And it's, you know, right where the upper part of Michigan connects. it is like, it's terrific. Mackinac Island, no cars, so it's all horse and buggy, and all you smell is fresh made fudge from like all these stores were been around since like the 1800s, and horse poop. It's terrific. And while you're there, there is a Revolutionary War era fort, and it maybe an War of 1812. One or both of those wars. There is a fort there, so it is tied to history. The place is unbelievable, and again, because it's my show, if you go up to the way tippy top of the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, go to the Isle Royale National Park. Again, go out on Lake Superior. The Great Lakes they're pretty great. So if you get a chance, go in the Great Lakes. They're unbelievable. Speaking of the Great Lakes, so the first time again, quick story. First time I ever went to Grand Rapids, like 20 years ago when I was working at Fidelity, traveling on business, a young Josh Kane, 23. Every time I went somewhere, I always tried to do something fun. So I was like, I'm driving out to Lake Michigan. I'd never been to the Great Lakes before. I get out there and I was so overwhelmed with the experience that I was like, I have to go in the water. But of course I was totally unprepared. So what did I do? Stripped down to my underwear and jumped in Lake Michigan. And then ran back to the car and drove back to the hotel. All right, that's episode number 38 of the Josh Kane Presidential Fireside Chat. Bye for now.